fiddlehead. It's a delicacy all around the world. And in the northeast United States and maritime Canada, it's not all that difficult to find. Join me today on another episode of Wildwood Way's Edible and Medicinal Treasures to learn about this interesting and delicious plant, unfortunately called the fiddlehead, more accurately known as the ostrich fern. The reason it is unfortunate that the ostrich fern is known as the fiddlehead is because all ferns begin life in a fiddlehead stage. These young ferns here like to grow in the same type of terrain as the ostrich fern, on sandy ground that's near a water source, where they can put roots down deep into a wet area and yet have their feet dry, so to speak. Yet only the ostrich fern is edible. All ferns in North America, apart from the ostrich fern, have some degree of toxicity. Most are also bitter. This particular one is not bitter, though it has a degree of toxicity. Another fern that's very common throughout the forest, that's often mistaken for the edible ostrich fern during its fiddlehead stage, is the bracken. And this is particularly troubling since bracken is carcinogenic. This is the kind of terrain in which the ostrich fern likes to grow. Mixed forest, either softwoods, hardwoods, or both. And especially near flowing water. Now and then I'll see the odd ostrich fern crown growing near stagnant water, pond, a boggy area, or even the equivalent of a more permanent puddle, what is sometimes called a vernal pond. But the ostrich fern especially loves to grow near flowing water. It's also picky about the kind of ground that it grows on. The ground here is sandy. And the ostrich fern especially likes to grow in sandy soil. It'll tolerate a little mud, a little grit. But sandy soil seems to be its favorite. This spot where I'm harvesting hosts about 1 acre of ostrich ferns, and it is more than enough to meet our needs throughout the year. The ostrich fern is a very vigorous plant, and it likes to grow in colonies. The colonies form by runners under the soil cloning the plant. Colonies can be fairly dense. Other ferns, such as cinnamon and interrupted ferns, may grow between them, as well as other foliage, so it's important to be sure that you know how to identify the ostrich fern when harvesting. You needn't worry about killing yourself eating the wrong fern, though. None of the ferns are really deadly. They are mildly toxic. If you eat a lot of them, they could cause a headache or some gastrointestinal illness. I imagine that if you ate buckets, you could become seriously ill from them, but deaths due to eating the wrong ferns are quite rare. You wouldn't think it to look at it, but this little patch of woods here is an ostrich fern gold mine. Now it's between 1 and 2 weeks before the ferns emerge, and once we get past the last snow of the season and the nights stay up above freezing and the peeper frogs begin their songs and we start to get the first of the season's black flies, I start to check the patches where the ostrich fern grows about every 3 or 4 days, because once they begin to emerge, it goes fast. A few years back, we had a devil of a time getting our season's ostrich ferns because I went out and checked the crowns one weekend and they still had not emerged, and I went out and checked again the following week to find that they had mostly emerged and were already unfolding and were for the most part too mature. By hitting a number of growing areas, I was still able to get us enough ferns. You can call me a romantic, a mystic, a shaman, or just plain nuts. But when I walk in these lovely old forests, especially at this time of the year, late in the autumn, when all the leaves have fallen, or early spring, when they're just budding, and the forest can be as silent as the whisper of a ghost, or raucous with the songs of spring birds, I can feel the magic in the wood then. Lunch is just a simple affair. Some of the Newfoundland style hardtack known as cream crackers, and a little cheese and a little chocolate. Just some energy to keep going before I get on to the next step of this backwoods trek. And good Will-O-Wisp is happy for a break, aren't you, boy? This is the island of the ostriches. You use that term, I think most people think this little bit of land way out in the river. It is a little bit of land, and it's totally cut off by water, but just the Rusalka Brook. It's maybe a dozen feet across. In some places, maybe 3 feet deep. In most places, much less, like right over there. It's only inches deep, and you can walk across it easily with water boots. This is a very good place to hunt ostrich ferns. And ostrich ferns grow from perennial clumps in the ground. Those dark clusters sticking out there represents about a half dozen of them. Don't ask me where any of these are. Everybody who hunts ostrich ferns keeps the knowledge of the colonies they harvest secret, otherwise they would vanish. When harvesting ostrich ferns, it's important to never take more than half the green growth coming off the top of the crowns, and be absolutely careful not to damage the crowns. It's easy to break the ostrich ferns off the crowns. I try to break them about an inch over the crown in order to avoid damaging the crown. If you damage it, the crown can die. If you don't damage it, the ostriches will keep growing and growing off of that crown, and it can last decades. If you do damage it, even a small bit of damage is enough to kill the crown. And that's the end of that particular crown, and no more ostrich ferns from it. So you can damage it by injuring the crown, by cutting into it or breaking it. You can also damage it by cutting more than half the green growth off the top of a crown. Bear in mind, any young ferns you harvest will not regrow during that growing season, and that's that much less energy the crown will get. It has to have at least half of its fiddlehead shoots mature into ferns and gather energy in order to be able to continue growing through the year and providing a good harvest from year to year. Usually I break the ferns. Sometimes they seem a little tough or resistant to breaking, so sometimes I'll bring a small foraging knife with me and I'll harvest them with the knife. You have to be especially careful if you're using knives not to cut into the crown. Like I said, I always make sure to harvest them at least an inch over the crown in order to avoid damaging that all-important crown. Preserve the crowns and you'll have ferns year to year. If you fail to preserve them, though, your ostrich fern colony will soon dwindle and be gone. Well, this is new. It looks like I don't have to worry about carrying water boots with me to cross the Rusalka Brook anymore. This tree fell over sometime during the winter, just a little beyond where I was just filming. I'll make it a convenient bridge for crossing the brook and getting at the ferns when it's time. It's a bit early in the season just yet. Roughly 95 to 99% of the ostrich ferns have not emerged from their crowns yet. I can see them just beginning to form in most of the crowns. Sometime within a week, 2 weeks at most, it will be the peak of the season and time to harvest. But I do believe I can get a pound or two easily enough, and we'll be able to have our first wild greens of the spring season. And isn't that nice? This right here is a small and relatively young crown. The crown is the perennial portion of the ostrich fern plant from which the ferns themselves emerge. You can see right at the tip of my knife the juvenile ostrich ferns just now beginning to emerge from the crown. They're just now beginning to form. This is a giveaway of an ostrich fern crown. We have the crown partially concealed beneath last year's leaf fall. And emerging from it and fanned out in every direction are the desiccated ferns from last season. They will dry up and break off and compost as the summer progresses. Here we see spore shoots emerging from the ostrich fern crown, there at the center of the picture. And these are one of the best telltales that you're in ostrich fern country. Now I see just over there a place where a few ostrich ferns are coming up. And I'm going to set aside my filming now and go harvest a pound or two worth so that we can have them with dinner tonight. Here we have a small cluster of very young ostrich ferns. Too small to harvest. They're only an inch to an inch and a half tall. I'll let them grow another day or two before I harvest them. But I have to watch these very carefully because ostrich ferns can and will grow several inches per day. It's good to see these. I'm seeing more and more in the earliest state of emergence. I'm pretty sure as I look more and more throughout this area This area will reach the peak of harvest about the middle of this week, Wednesday probably. If not then certainly by next Saturday. The ostrich fern is not terribly difficult to identify. They have a beautiful dark green color that stands out from the forest unlike anything else at this time of the year. Nothing else really possesses the kind of lush and perfect green of the ostrich fern. Also, most other ferns either have fine hairs or scales all up and down their stems. The ostrich fern, on the other hand, only has a single scale. The scale grows to either side of the curl as the fern emerges. However, you cannot count on that scale being there when you're trying to identify the ostrich fern. It's papery, fragile, and delicate, and is very prone to falling off or blowing away at the slightest breeze or disturbance. Perhaps the most telling identifying trait of the ostrich fern is the deep channel that develops on the inside of the fern. Some ferns don't have channels at all, just a flat area on the inside of the stem. Other ferns have shallow channels, but on the ostrich fern, the channel is well pronounced and deep. Think of it as like the channel that develops on a celery stalk, except ostrich ferns are typically considerably smaller than a stalk of celery, but the channel is deep in proportion. The channel of a celery stalk dominates its form. Likewise with the ostrich fern, the channel is deep, pronounced, and dominates its form. The ostrich fern is not a common fern, but when it finds an area with just the right environment, a clear, cool, fast-moving brook or river, and soil that is a good mix of clay and sand, and a place where the runners can spread over ground that's rich with moisture, but where they don't have to keep their feet wet, so to speak, the ferns will rapidly and firmly establish themselves. In this particular area, during the middle of the summer, at the height of their growth, the forest floor is predominated with the dark emerald green of the enormous ferns. Ostrich ferns are the largest fern in North America and can grow 4 to 5 feet tall and spread their leaves as much as 6 feet out from the crown. A large, beautiful, and glorious plant, the ostrich fern enriches the forest and our diet enormously. The first early season ostrich ferns are only a few inches tall and hardly worth the effort unless, like me, you find yourself craving some wild greens. These ostrich ferns are much better and much further along, close to a foot tall, with stalks almost as big as my little finger. Ostrich ferns like this provide a lush harvest that fills up bags quickly. It's beginning to rain, so I have to put away my camera. I'm not too worried about the rain otherwise, but I'm going to go through here and harvest. And I'm glad I came out here today and check. It's still early for the season yet, but these are the best greens. Once the ferns begin to unfold, like you see these here, some people think that they're no longer good to eat. They're just fine. The edible part of the fern can always be told because it has a rubbery, fleshy feel. Just bend the fern. If it breaks, it means it's too tough to eat. If it's still rubbery and fleshy, you can still harvest it. Though, typically as a rule, as long as the fern still has some curl in the leaves, you can eat at least the upper portion of the leaf. Once the curl is completely gone, it's time to quit harvesting for the season. The taste of ostrich ferns has been likened to asparagus. I think there's a slight resemblance. To me, the ostrich fern tastes like the ostrich fern. It's a little sweet, a little vegetable, but it has its own certain nuance that I don't think is quite matched by anything else. If ostrich ferns don't grow in your area, and you have a chance to get a pound or two from your local grocery, I know they're going to be expensive, but treat yourself. It's well worth it. It is a unique taste and an incredibly healthy vegetable from a part of the world that few get to know. A lovely lichen growing on this young maple. It looks like ivy growing on an oak. I'm not familiar with this particular lichen, but I can tell you two things about it. One, it's edible, and two, it's medicinal. How do I know? Because of the thousands of lichen that exist in the world, there are only two known to be toxic, and both of those are orange. Also, All lichen are comprised of either cyanobacteria or an algae cell that is protected and fed by fungi. The fungi form protective walls around the cyanobacteria algae cells and provide the algae with water and shield it from the elements. In return, the photosynthetic cyanobacteria or algae make food, which is then shared with the fungi. The fungi give back to the algae and cyanobacteria antibiotics and antivirals and polysaccharides to protect them from illnesses. The same medicinal substances benefit humans. If you're ever in the bush and you have an injury that's becoming infected or you're feeling sick, you can grab almost any lichen, unless it's orange, and either make a paste of it or boil it and drink the tea, and it will no doubt benefit you. You can put the paste directly on a wound, you can boil it and make a tea and drink the tea for a healing effect, and it will no doubt benefit you. I find that foraging has a way of yielding more than one treasure. Whatever you're after, whatever you find, as you harvest it, you're going to find something else. For example, that ivy-looking lichen that I found just a moment ago. Here on this log, there is a great deal of desiccated turkey tail, a highly medicinal fungus that grows on dead wood, particularly fallen logs. There's more on another fallen log right over there. Now, the mycelium is in these logs, and they'll yield fresh turkey tails this summer or autumn if I want to harvest some. I don't know that I will. I have plenty of other, at least as potent medicinal fungi already at the cottage, dried and ready to use. But this is here should the day ever come that we need it. Well, here we are, about an hour and a half later, and about 5 pounds of ostrich ferns later. These ostrich ferns, as I said, are not the biggest. These are just the very first tentative ones, just testing to see if it's spring before the colony itself wakes up. Somewhere between 95 and 99% of the crowns have not yet even pushed up any ostrich fern shoots. Still, 5 pounds of fresh greens after a long winter will be very nice. We ran out of our frozen greens a couple of months back, and there was snow still on the ground, and we've been eating canned and dried stuff ever since then. But these will be a lovely addition with meals for the next few nights. I want my wife Daphne to be delighted to see them. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Wildwood Ways, Edible and Medicinal Treasures. Keep watching to learn more. Many more episodes will be coming this foraging season. Let's go home, boy.